Okay, so number one, which of the following statements is true about accounting for uncollectible accounts under the allowance method of accounting? The answer here would be letter C class. But for some reason, many students would forget that the write-off of receivables, the write-off of receivables would actually not have any impact on the net realizable value of your receivable. Why? How do you get the net realizable value class? Gross receivables minus allowances. Again, how do you get your net realizable value? The gross receivable minus your allowances. And in most problem, only one allowance only one allowance account would be relevant, or only one allowance account would be used. And what allowance account is this? Is your allowance for doubtful accounts. Okay, so you'll have to keep in mind this. What happens to your gross receivable account and your allowance for doubtful accounts if you write off? Let's start with your gross receivables. If you write off a receivable, what will happen to your gross receivables? Increase, decrease, or no change? You write off a receivable. You remove it from the books, you remove it from your records. What will happen to your gross receivables? Increase, decrease, or no change? It will obviously decrease. So that's why many students would think that if you are asked for the net realizable value of your accounts receivable, they would think that a write-off would have a negative impact on your receivables. They would think that a write-off would cause a decrease in your net realizable value or your net receivables. Okay, but we'll explain later on why that's not the case. Next, what's the effect of a write-off to your allowance for doubtful accounts? What's the effect of a write-off to your allowance for doubtful accounts? It would decrease. Okay, what's your entry when you write off class? Your entry would be debit, allowance for doubtful accounts, and credit, accounts receivable. Because this is a very basic entry for write-offs class. Under the allowance method, your entry would be debit, allowance for doubtful accounts, and credit, accounts receivables. Obviously, what is the effect of a credit to AR? It would decrease the AR. What's the normal balance of your allowance for doubtful accounts? It is credit because it is a contra asset account. Its nature is opposite or against your receivable or your asset. So the normal balance of your ADA is credit. So what happens if you debit your ADA, your allowance for doubtful accounts? It would decrease. Okay, so again, what is the effect of a write-off to your gross receivable? Decrease. What is the effect of write-off to your allowance for doubtful accounts? Decrease. And that is why most students would think that if you have a write-off, your net realizable, your net receivables, or the net realizable value of your accounts receivable would also decrease. But if you analyze it more, class, the the gross receivable will decrease, but the ADA will also decrease. But what do we do with the ADA in relation to your gross receivables to get your net receivables? It would decrease. So the amount that you would deduct from your gross receivable would actually decrease also. And the amount of decrease in your ADA would also be the same amount of decrease in your gross receivable. So that is why a write-off will not have any impact on the net realizable value of your receivables. Okay, the first item would be reduced, but the amount to be deducted from the gross receivables would also decrease. So the amount to be deducted would be lower. That's why the net change would be zero. And trying to recall the term for subtraction without less, di ba you have is that minuend? Di ba if it's addition, you call that addends for both. But for subtraction, you call it subtrahend, and the subtrahend is the one to be deducted from, and the one that is going to be deducted is the minuend. So, do we all remember those terms, class? So, if the gross receivable would be our subtrahend, let's not use that one, okay? Or maybe we interchange that. But so you get the point. The amount to be deducted from is it? I'm not sure. Subtrahend and minimum, which is which. But I hope you get the point, as it's not really that deep. So that's why the answer number one would be letter C. Okay, the net realizable value of accounts receivable in the balance sheet is the same before and after an account is written off. Letter D, allowance for doubtful accounts is closed each year to retained earnings. That is incorrect. What accounts are closed to your retained earnings class? Only your revenues and expenses. And what accounts are closed in the first place? Only your temporary account. And your allowance for doubtful account is not a temporary account. It is not a temporary account, but it is a, what's opposite of temporary class? No, temporary is the same as nominal. Opposite of temporary is permanent or real account. I can hear my voice, so what I'm saying makes sense to me, but if it's cutting off, it does not make sense to you. So we'll just continue. So again, your allowance for doubtful accounts will not be closed because it is a real or permanent account. Okay? While the accounts that are to be closed are your temporary or nominal accounts. Letter A, I think, letter A is a contradiction to letter C, so definitely that would be wrong. Letter B, budget, ex, budget, ex, budget expense is debited when a specific account is written off as doubtful. Again, what did we say was the entry if we write off a receivable, debit, allowance for doubtful accounts, and credit, accounts receivable. Your budget expense has no place in our entry to write off your receivable. So that's why when singers have concerts, that they have something in their ears that they will hear what you are hearing. So okay, from my end, I can hear my whole sentences. What give me Sultan? What? Hello. Hello. Why you did not understand anything, class? Let's try to proceed, class. Where were we? Okay, so budget expense would be debited only when you recognize additional provisions to your doubtful accounts. Okay, so if you increase your allowance, your entry would be debit, budget expense, and credit your AGA. Okay, that is if we are using the allowance method for our